All right. Now, lately we've been seeing a lot of videos on here talking about legacy. They're comparing Floyd Mayweather to people like Sugar Ray Leonard, Sugar Ray Robinson, and all that. And they're saying that Mayweather's legacy doesn't hold up because he doesn't have like his own hagglers, his Hearns, who else, like Jake LaMotta's or Roberto Duran's, etc., etc. Well, you gotta look at it based on, the time period. Back then, they didn't have as many fighters as they have today. Back then, each weight class had one champion. Today, each weight class got 4 champions, So that makes for 68 possible champions at one time. That's counting the WBA, WBO, WBC, and the IBO belts. Now, there's some people who count the Ring magazine belt, but I don't. Some people will count that as a major belt, and with that would make it 85 possible champions. But then on top of that, you got all the international belts. You got like the NABO belts. You got who knows how many more belts. There was probably enough, to where they could have 100 different people claiming that they own a title at one time. Back then they didn't have that, and so that's why you can't, compare, past to the present. Look, you gotta look at the fighters there in that time period. Back then, Robinson, yeah, he had a lot of fights, but then at the same time, people say, oh, he always took on the best. That's not true. Because sometimes he didn't fight when he wasn't satisfied with the money for it. But there was a documentary on him, and I forgot who it was. It was somebody who knew him personally. They got people on there that was close to him, family members, people from his entourage, etc. I mean, like his wife was on there talking about, well, if he felt I deserved it, then he'd hit me for it, and stuff like that. And then they got this dude talking about you never knew when Robinson was going to fight until fight night, and he stepped inside the ring, because he wasn't always satisfied with the type of money they was talking about he was gonna make for the fight or whatever. And then you look at Mayweather, yeah, he'd be looking to fight for money too, but at the same time, it's not like he's picking at people who's unknown, people at the bottom of the rankings list. But you gotta go back and look at his legacy. After he won his first championship belt against Gennaro Hernandez, he never fought somebody coming off a loss or a bad fight. The people that he fought, since winning that championship belt, in his 18th fight since then, he was fighting people coming off streaks of wins or KO victories. The only 2 people he fought who came off a loss, was Zab Judah, who had lost to Carlos Baldomir, and DeMarcus Corley, who lost to Zab Judah. Those are the only 2 people he fought coming off a loss since he became champion for the first time. And then on top of that, you look at each weight class he was in. He started off, what was it? 135 pounds? Was it, or was it 130? Yeah, it was 130. He started off there. He won that championship. He became the lineal champion there. And he was talking about how he can't make the weight easy anymore, so that's why he moved up. And he was talking about it. He called out people. He called out people like Prince Nassim. He called out Shane Mosley. He called out, who else? Oscar De La Hoya, Costa Zoo. These are people that he said he wanted to fight, going up, but those people never, answered back. And then, like, just a couple of months after he moved up to Costa Zoo's weight class, Ricky hadn't retired him. But when he moved up to the next weight class, after winning that belt against Gennaro Hernandez, he went straight for the top guy in the weight class, which was Jose Luis Castillo. They had that fight, could have gone either way. But he was like, yeah, I had to have surgery. I had, messed up rotator cuff. They were saying he had messed up ribs. He had surgery, came back, fought him and beat him more convincingly in the rematch. After that, he fought, Victoriano Sosa, Philip Endal, and he moved up in weight again. Most likely because, like he said, when he was back at super featherweight, he couldn't make the weight as easily anymore, so, he moved up. And then, when he moved up, he fought, DeMarcus Corley and Henry Bruselis, as title eliminators, to see who was going to fight for Arturo Gotti's title. And Gotti is another person that, Floyd called out, when he was at a lower weight. Bruselis, people are talking about why the Cotto fight didn't happen. But you gotta look at this. When he fought Bruselis, that was a fight people used basically as a simulation to see what Mayweather versus Cotto would look like, because they were saying that Bruselis and Cotto were very similar and fought the same way. And after seeing what Floyd did to him, people was like, Cotto would be a fool to get in the ring with Mayweather at this point. And then Bob Arum, who they were both under, said Cotto needed more time. He said he needed maybe 6 more months because, 1, he wasn't ready skill-wise, and 2, Cotto's name was not big enough, for that fight to generate the type of money he thought it should have. So, considering that, Bob Arum owning both of them, you can't really do nothing to Floyd based on that. But after that, he fought Arturo Gatti, and these are people who was at the top of that division, okay? These aren't people who was, down at the bottom, fighting nobodies. These are people who was at the top. He was getting, the best competition he could at that point. He wasn't just, fighting just anyone, okay? He was fighting people who had proven themselves. After that, he fought Sharmba Mitchell because, he was having a tune-up to fight Zab Judah. Mitchell was a southpaw. He had that as a tune-up to fight Zab Judah. He took Judah's belts. And then after that, he fought, Carlos Baldomir. And something interesting is, at the time he was getting ready to fight Zab Judah, he was on ESPN with Brian Kenny. And Brian Kenny was like, okay, how come you're fighting Zab Judah when he just lost to Carlos Baldomir? Baldomir is the undisputed welterweight champ right now. Baldomir, obviously wasn't official because he didn't have all 3 belts. But, he did beat Judah. The only reason he didn't have the belts was because sanctioning fees was going to be more than he was getting paid for the fight, and he said he didn't feel like paying that. So he just kept the WBC belt, because to him, he felt like it was a loyalty thing with him. So he's like, well, they gave me a shot, whatever. So yeah, he wanted to, I guess, basically show appreciation for that. So Brian Kenny's like, yeah, Zab Judah was champ. He beat, Corey Spinks, became undisputed, but Carlos Baldomir beat him, so why not fight him? So, He beat Judah. And he went on to fight Carlos Baldomir and beat him. And, people say Baldomir was too old. Well, Zab Judah is younger than Mayweather, so I don't know what you're talking about. Baldomir was too old. But, yeah, you look at that, it's like, people at that time were complaining, cause that date that he fought Baldomir was originally going to be, when he fought Antonio Margarito. And after fighting Zab Judah, he had this dispute with Bob Arum. Apparently he didn't get all the money Arum owed him for that fight. And there was a dispute about that. And he went to Arum, he's like, okay, I want a $10 million guarantee to fight Cotto and Ricky Hatton. And then I want a $20 million guarantee to fight Oscar De La Hoya. And Bob Arum revealed that to Dan Rafael. Well, Dan Rafael wrote the article about it back in 2006 when this was happening. And Bob Arum was like, yeah, Floyd was cool. He was going to accept the offer to fight Margarito, the $8 million. But he wanted $10 million for Hatton and Cotto and $20 million for Oscar, and it's just not in the books to make that type of money off those fights. So what does Floyd do? He buys his contract out for, what was it, $750,000? He bought his contract out, and just after parting ways, Margarito is still with Arum. Cotto is still with Arum. So, those fights aren't going to happen since, Arum just lost his cash cow. And then when that happened, he said that Floyd ducked Cotto and Margarito. I'm like, you just told people that he wanted to fight Cotto, and you told him that the guarantee that he wanted, you said that fight wasn't going to be big enough to generate that type of money. And then now you're saying that he ducked Cotto. The same thing when Oscar De La Hoya left him, he started talking trash on Oscar, saying Oscar was on PEDs. But here's the thing, after that, after fighting Baldomir, that was the day that would have been Margarito. But I already explained what happened on ESPN. He went on and fought De La Hoya. And De La Hoya, he beat De La Hoya, but De La Hoya was the bigger man. And, and Mayweather, he had just had 3 fights at 147. He wasn't even a full 147 yet, and decided to fight De La Hoya. He'd only been at 147 for about a year before fighting De La Hoya, and beat him. And this was after De La Hoya came off his 21-month vacation on retirement that he did, and he beat, was it Mayorga, who was on PEDs, and then came back and, fought Floyd and lost to him. And I'm like I look at this and I'm like, okay, yeah, there aren't people who's like Marvin Hagler or Ray Leonard or Ray Robinson or Tommy Hearns, because they made it so easy for people to, become a champion these days. Like I said, back then there was 1 belt in each class. And then, so, everybody had to fight. Everybody wanted that belt because that's what was going to distinguish them from everyone else. There was only 1 belt, so you had to fight to get it. But now you got who knows how many belts. Anyone can just snatch one. Like, you're seeing people fighting for vacant ones all the time. Cotto never won a belt from anybody until he faced Yuri Foreman. All the other belts he'd won up until that point were vacant, And I look at that and I'm like, yeah, you got those fighters who are fighting for vacant belts, but then you got the ones who's at the top of the division who's whooping ass. And those are the people you got to look at as the Marvin Haglers, the Ray Leonards, the George Foremans, or Joe Lewises, or whatever. Those are the people you look at. Yeah, they don't compare, but whose fault is that? You can't blame a guy because he beat the top guys in his division just because, they don't compare to people in the past. And that's just my piece on it.